In this episode, I sit down with friends and clients Garret and Miles Gastile, where they discuss their journey getting started with infinite banking and the many ways they've implemented the process in a short period of time. This is Dollars and Nonsense. If you follow the herd, you will be slaughtered. Hey, fellas, welcome to the show.
Hey, Nate, thanks.
Yeah, I got Garret and Miles Gastile here, clients for a few years. And, wanted to start off just by saying I appreciate you guys coming on. I appreciate what you've done. And I really do think you guys are a good testament for how people can get started. I think, as you guys will both bring up, you weren't independently wealthy when you started. Maybe not so yet either. But you hit the ground running with it. You've adopted it. You've incorporated it really as much as you could, in my opinion, over the last, just having learned about it a few years ago. And I don't think it would be a stretch to say it's changed a lot of things about your financial life. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to share with our listeners how you found out about infinite banking, what you had to overcome to really believe in it, and then what you've done with it, how it's changed your perspective. All these things I'm sure people would be really, really happy to listen to. So I think we could go ahead and dive in. I've got Garret and Miles here, brothers. Tell us a little bit about where you guys are coming from, and then we'll dive in.
Awesome.
So we both live in Boise, Idaho. I moved out here about 4 years ago, and Garret moved about 2 from Texas. I found out through infinite banking, actually through Garret. I would say before that, I gotten really fired up about real estate and passive income, and was kind of on that train, like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Bigger Pockets, that whole thing, and kind of obsessed with the idea of passive income. And then Garret comes along a year or so later and introduced this concept that was really, really weird, and that I pushed back a lot on at first and sent a bunch of Dave Ramsey videos. And so
I know, honestly, it's a bit funny to
introduced.
be, Robert Kiyosaki and Dave Ramsey and have them both influence you at the same time, because they're such polar opposites in so many fronts.
Yeah.
But it happens all the time.
Exactly.
Anyway, so
that's
Boise,
how I got
Idaho. So
introduced,
Miles, you
and
moved
now-
there before it exploded in the real estate world. It was right, in the pandemic.
missed the
Wasn't Boise
window.
one of those really, really hot markets?
Yeah, still is. We missed that really crazy window. We moved in 2019, but it still has been pretty crazy nonstop since.
Garrett's probably lost money because he moved at the top.
I moved right in the middle. I moved and bought right in the middle of the peak, so feeling good about that.
Okay, that's good.
But I think Miles said it well. I'm the older brother by a year, not much. So I look up to Miles in a lot of ways. But Miles got me fired up about real estate and passive income too. And when I first started kind of listening to all that stuff, I was working at a small consulting firm and just working crazy hours, and kind of was telling Miles, I wanted this real estate stuff to be true and financial freedom. And I was newly married, and I think I had a kid on the way and stuff. And I was just my goal was to make partner. And I remember Miles telling me all this stuff and being like, this is too good to be true. And do I spend time on becoming partner or building real estate? And you can't have everything, and being a good dad and husband. And I remember I sat down with a spreadsheet, and at the time I was putting, at the full amount into the 401k and all that stuff. And just got to get that match, right?
That's right.
And I can talk more about that later. But
yeah.
And I remember sitting down with the spreadsheet and doing this. It was a really simple waterfall of, if I save X amount for X months, I can buy a rental property. And if that cash flows that add $100 a month, that'll add this much. And then in 4 more years, I can buy another rental property, and another 3 years, I can buy another one. And I won't get to financial freedom until I'm 70. I remember just kind of feeling defeated by that a little bit. And then actually I got introduced to infinite banking by my wife's uncle, who's like my financial mentor, and he's actually one of my business partners now. And he's in real estate, and when we would talk about real estate, he would sort of throw in this infinite banking thing. And I remember, same as Miles at first, was like, what is this? This is weird. But then I read Rich Dad, well, not Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I read Becoming Your Own Banker. And I remember just, whenever you like first see it, it's like, this is too good to be true. Like, this can't be real.
Do. Yeah.
And then, and so then I remember I called Nate, and I talked to a lot of insurance folks, and Nate was not a typical insurance person. Like, there was no selling. It was like, well, just do whatever you want to put into it, and we'll go from there.
Yeah,
and then,
that's funny.
So
some people actually get mad at me for being so nonchalant in conversations, and I feel bad about that. I always figured, because I hate being sold stuff. I hate it. I don't like the sales process. I don't like being kind of pushed or salesy slogans that are supposed to elicit emotional responses that cause you to take action, and all these sorts of things that people are supposed to do. I don't like doing them. And so it's almost, I have such an adverseness to it that some people were like, no, I want you to tell me what to do. I'm like, I won't do it, people.
That's a good point. You brought up something that struck a memory for me is I was helping out a family friend, and he's an intern at a large insurance company that will remain unnamed. And he was like, hey, can you come in? I have to like hit a certain amount of interviews. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. So I went in, they were like grilling me about like, so do you want to invest in this and this? I'm like, I actually don't do that. I put all my money in life insurance. And they're like, oh, we do that too. And it was very, now that you're mentioning that, it's the demeanor is so different. Like, they're very salesy, and it's very like, oh, we can hit X amount of returns. And I'm like, it's not about the returns.
Right. Yeah, I'm doing IBC. Like, but it's interesting that you bring that up, because it's just a tactic. It's just, they're saying, I got to meet a quota, come on in. That's not true. They're actually, that's just a networking style. You know, it's kind of common. Not, you know, not that I'm opposed to people who are really good in the sales industry, but I am just merely saying that a lot of times they have to do some sort of tactic to get you into the door. Yeah. And then maybe what they're selling is awesome, but I just get so pushed off by that type of thing that I try to avoid it with all costs. And, you know, I was just in a meeting with a guy the other day where he actually told me, he was in person. I don't do a lot of in-person meetings, by the way. And so he may be listening to this, and he actually told me, you know, Nate, it's almost like obnoxious how much you don't tell me what you think I should do. Like, it's like you're so anti-sales that I don't know. I want you to actually, you know, be excited and push me a little bit, which, I don't know. It's not my personality. I don't really enjoy doing it. That's right. I don't know why there's not a huge line out front of people knocking on the door, and I can just say next and like sign here. But
there will be soon.
After this podcast,
right? Yeah,
exactly. Garrett and I are talking to enough people about it. Actually, talking at enough people about it.
Yeah. And you guys are learning, by the way, how hard it is to sell this. How hard it is to get people. Yeah, you got to start using sales tactics, probably, guys. You guys have been trying to talk to people, and it hasn't been working.
Yeah.
Miles, we should
I haven't
talk
converted
about
anyone yet. I've tried a few people, and I've had like hour-long conversations, and then I send them the book, and I try to explain it, and they come back and they're like, I'm like, oh, what did I miss?
The running joke right now with like Miles and me and our wives is that whenever we get like anything, we're like, we're going to go buy more premium. And our wives are like, when are we ever going to see this money? And it's like, anyways. Yeah. So we're still working on, once we get to the point where like we write a check and it grows, I think they'll be like, stoked. But
yeah, because you guys are kicking it, you know, as fast as you possibly can. And none of your policies are even in the profitable stage of life yet. And, you know, it's something that I try to tell people. Infinite banking, paying premiums can be really exciting in one of two ways. It's either you're really excited because it's profitable now and you're about to write a check to a policy and the cash value is going to increase by more than you're paying, or you're just ticking one more premium off the checklist before that becomes a reality for the rest of your life. And some people think, well, we can't really use the policy until it's profitable, or we can't use it. And I would just merely, you know, bring it up. I'm sure we'll get into more of your guys' story too, but just, you know, obviously you guys have been using policies for quite a bit, even in the first couple of years, just getting things started.
Yeah.
But
even in small amounts too, I'd say to people, like, I always worked for commercial contractors. I don't have a super high income. And I think even starting off with like a couple $100 a month policies has made a huge difference. So, I mean, I think that's a hesitation for some people, is like, how do I afford that? And I think that is a huge hurdle. Obviously that is hard to overcome, but now it's not, how do I afford it? It's okay. How much what's the absolute max that I can dump in? I'll figure out everything else. I'm going to use a HELOC to pay for it if I have to. I'm going to put in as much as possible. So it's funny how that shift kind of happens, and people like, that's why it's hard to sell people, is because they're like, that's so counterintuitive, that thought. So,
stop telling them to start that, Miles. That's your first problem, People you're terrifying everybody.
I remember when Miles and I like turned a corner with it, and we would be on the phone like, how do I like how do I put as much in each month? And Nate was like, okay,
we've mellowed out.
We'd call Nate.
For
Nate
sure.
was like, okay, you need to like slowly. It's like a slow build, and okay.
Yeah, you can't create something out of nothing. Still, it still follows the logic and the rules of money.
Right.
It's just like we were talking about before. It's the Nelson Nash analogy of a river. It helps to think of everything as all the river, all the money in the world is connected. So, I think it's one pot of money, and that view of it has really shaped at least like how I go about my personal finances and what I pursue on the side of work and whatnot. So,
absolutely. Well, tell me this. Maybe this would be interesting. Do you guys remember what your biggest questions or hesitations were as you were learning about IBC?
Everything.
the whole thing.
I'm probably a little bit more of like I'll just jump in personality, as Miles knows, and Miles is more cautious. So I think
we're both.
For me, it's kind of like I jumped in, and then now I have all these questions about it, like as I'm getting to them. But I remember Miles probably has a lot of. I remember Miles sending me a Dave Ramsey video, and like we debated it for a while. But I think for me, it was just like, I had to like start putting money in and like see the illustration that you made, Nate, to like really get it. Like it didn't, like, I'm like, okay, I kind of get it. I think it makes sense. Like, I don't think I had a lot of questions up front, but Miles probably had some. Miles, you had a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think a big hesitation I had was obviously the whole loan thing is weird. How does the insurance company make money? Why are they doing it? Why is Nate doing it? Why is he reaching out to me? Like, what's the incentive structure behind each entity? And I had an interesting point come up. I was talking at this guy at church about it. Yeah. And he was like, well, the insurance company is obviously benefiting from this. And he was asking good questions. And this is also why I'm like, okay, I'm not quite enough advanced in the sales part of this, because I was kind of like, well, you just don't get it. They're not really benefiting. It's a mutual company. We're owners. But I think wrapping your head around all that takes a long time, and really takes, at least for me, really takes doing it until like little pieces along the way start to click. I think it's not like you get it all at once. Like, I think I got the gist of it from reading the book, and I was fired up about it. But then I still have questions coming up where I'm like, wait a second, why is that not right? And it's still like more epiphanies and more like, okay, I got to put more in. And after this, I'm probably going to be fired up and try to open another, even though I can't probably afford that at this point. But.
Yeah. I keep having to rein Miles in. I'm like, just, give it time, my friend. Your premiums are really, really solid. But that kind of goes back to.
I think that is true.
Oh, go ahead.
It's about like practicing. I think that is kind of what Nate, you've always said is, it just like any discipline in life, it's about doing it. And it's not just putting premium in. It's about putting premium in and then moving that money to get the system, the money moving. And that's been a big shift for me, even in the last, year, I think, is how to deploy this cash value that's growing. Because if not, it's just, it's not really practicing infinite banking.
Yeah, I think you make up a good point for sure, in that we the people we find that have this idea of, where the transactions you make to a policy feel like payments. And obviously payments are the things that every payment you make is money that left your account and never comes back. That's kind of the definition of a payment. And so they mistakenly put premiums and loan repayments in those categories, especially premiums, very common. And you find that a lot of times the people who are doing that are the ones who aren't really using it very often, which is what you bring up. So in order to get out of some of the initial perspective problems, you have to use it to realize what it's actually about. Because we could talk all day about it, but how you feel about the transactions will end up determining your success or your ability to even do it. So if you feel that premiums are payments and you feel that loans are kind of bad and thus borrowing from policies is probably going to get me hurt somehow, even no matter what words you say or where your head's at or like an understanding in your mind, doesn't even matter, because if you feel that it's going to cause problems, then you'll never do it. And so I think what you're saying is, honestly, the only way to get it from the head to the heart really is to do it. And that's the case in a lot of different things, which I've talked about, many times on the show, where I like to bring in, IBC's not unique in that way. That's just how implementing new things often works. So and I also like to bring up for the standard bell curve of people. So there's obviously people on either side of the bell curve who are going to dive in with both feet and figure it out later. But that's not, the normal way to adopt a new strategy.
Is the money in your bank account losing value instead of growing? Are inflation and taxes going to get better or worse? Conventional banking makes the bank rich using your money and pays you little to nothing in return. We believe in challenging the status quo. After all, most of those conventional tools only seem to make someone else rich. Let us show you how to beat the banks and inflation. Visit livingwealth.com/beatinflation. You'll receive instant access to what we call the beginner's course. This in-depth and easy-to-follow course teaches people how to create and profit from infinite banking. You can become debt-free, in control, and achieve financial security and significance. Stop letting the banks and Wall Street dictate your financial future. Go to livingwealth.com/beatinflation today to instantly receive free, no-obligation access to this priceless course on infinite banking. Again, that's livingwealth.com/beatinflation. Now back to Nate and Holly.
Garrett, I think a lot of people would be interested in how you've used your policies. So maybe we start with Garrett and also move on to Miles. Just kind of real people, not me, describing, I got started and this is, the things I've been doing with the policies.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, I was doing that. I had very small amount of my income to go use to do side hustle stuff. But then
was that because of the 401k?
When I flipped, yeah. And yes. Yeah. And my wife was doing the same thing. And then once we did infinite banking, it was like, okay, how do we switch all this? How do we move all this income into going towards the policies? And then once we kind of got those rivers flowing into the policies instead of to locked up in a 401k box that I couldn't get, I can't get till I'm 60.
And Garrett, if I could interrupt you real quick about that. I think I remember having conversations with you and you were trying to ask me, should I stop contributing to the 401k to do IBC? And you were kind of the key, or your life has panned out to be exactly what I would recommend for or against the 401k. In other words, what I tell people is it's kind of a fruitless conversation to compare sitting money in a 401k compared to sitting money into a policy. Right? So it's kind of a fruitless conversation. If all you're going to do is let money sit someplace, we're really not even talking about IBC anymore, and you're just trying to figure out if you'd rather own a policy as an asset compared to, stuffing money in a 401k. So oftentimes my answer, which you were kind of the a poster boy for it in some ways, is just simply that I remember telling you this. you have to determine if the 401k is going to better achieve the goals you have for yourself, or if putting money into a policy and then leveraging that is going to better achieve the goals you have for yourself. And that was really what the crux was, because you did.
Right.
What's interesting is you were stuffing money in a 401k, even though philosophically you didn't really, that wasn't what you believed in as your actual future, wealth building tactic. You wanted to go into the more entrepreneurial side of finance.
Yeah. And I remember talking to a couple of my bosses at the time about it, and I remember them kind of saying to me, like, I don't do gimmicky stuff. And I was like, oh, sorry. But then now, like, looking back, the things I've been able to do since then. So, like, Miles mentioned his ADU unit, and because of the policies I had in place, I was able to loan him some money to finish that out. So he paid me interest that was a little bit more than the interest on the policy loan. And then I was also able to help Miles get to his goal of having that ADU, which was awesome. And I'd love to do more lending eventually, but need a little bit more capital probably for that. And the other thing, so I also do the land business, which I'm sure, that's in like all these different circles, but I do it with my wife's uncle, Dave. And that's been like, it's had its challenges, and, as any business does when it's like not our primary source of income, but like it's done really well, which, like, looking back on the last 2 years, wouldn't have been able to do that either without this. So that's been really cool. And then we also were able to like do this Airbnb that Miles and I have with our wives, that we're actually trying to sell because we're just kind of over it, frankly. Which is fine. I mean, I think though, to Miles's point that you said earlier, I've been able to like jump in with these things, and because I have the capital, I'm not like using someone else's money, so it's my money. And then also, like, if you're putting the money back into premium, it's like, yes, like you still have to make good investment decisions and that sort of thing, but you have this whole other mechanism that you can use as the banker that allows you to do things that you couldn't do before. So it's like the access to capital, it's the growth of the policies, plus it frees us up to do all of these other things that get growth while still getting the growth in the policies. So it's just like, it's allowed me to kind of, it's freed me up to do all that stuff for sure.
So like within like 3
5
years
years ago, never would have done. Yeah.
Yeah, well, just within like 3 years, as you're bringing all this up, that's a lot to do in a short period of time. You thought you might do one property every 3 or 4 years to begin with, and to have, a private loan that paid off well, an Airbnb that you didn't like, but still you're in, and then a land business that you launched and funded. There's a lot of just exciting things happening. And Miles, you were on both ends. You were benefiting from the fact that Garrett's doing IBC.
That's right.
Because of, having because you wanted the ADU, by the way, for those who wouldn't know, is an additional dwelling unit. It's like, you converted a garage on the property, right? Or built one at least, and
exactly
to host as an Airbnb. And I think it was pretty profitable while you were doing it, from what I can recall.
Oh, it was. That's kind of my, I guess, jumping off point into all this stuff. Because like I said, I was all fired up about real estate, and I'd always had the idea to do that. We ended up finding a house out here where I could convert the garage, and just used a lot of my own time and money to do it. And then I think I got introduced to IBC while I was doing that. So I was trying to like play with the numbers and make everything work. And it was cool because, as Garrett mentioned, to actually get us over the finish line, I had to take out a loan from Garrett and his business partner, and that helped us get there. And from there, we finished it. I got to open another policy to dump the cash flow in from the short-term rental. I did a cash out refi because on my primary residence, because the equity had gone up so much. And then I used that money to invest in the short-term rental with Garrett that we have in Tennessee that we're now selling. So we're really like these little things, it just snowballs. It really does. And I think, it's kind of similar to the concept of IBC, where like all these things are connected. And the sooner you start to see it that way, the sooner you start to see your cash as one pot and not just this is for investing, this is for living, this is for gifting, this is for, it's all one big, one warehouse to pull from. So I think that was definitely putting those all together was what really brought it home for me and made me bleed IBC till I die. So
that's really good. And that's what I've noticed is that you guys took it, you implemented it, you tried to push it as fast as you could, really pretty quickly, and then have just become full believers in it and have seen the fruits of it in a short period of time.
It also helped me to part ways with my passive income. So I think there's like a huge emphasis on passive income right now. It's like a hot buzzword. And I was, of course, fired up about that as well. And I was mentioning earlier, but I did this short-term rental on our property, and yes, it was profitable, but it wasn't suitable for me and my wife personally. There's strangers on our property all the time. And so I think having infinite banking and having a place where I'm storing my capital, where I know that it's safe, it's liquid, and it's growing, allowed me to part ways with that. And it allowed me to take a step backwards passive income wise and not feel stressed about that. So I think there's, a huge emphasis on like how many doors do you have? How much passive income do you have a month? And I think people can probably get caught up and be really miserable chasing those numbers. And I'm grateful that, I was able to take advantage of this asset that I improved, part ways with it. And I know that the money that I made from it is somewhere, like I said, safe and liquid, and where I'm redeploying it elsewhere into things that hopefully I like better and that fit our lifestyle more. So
Miles, something you just said kind of reminded me of why IBC caught my attention, and it has to do with deferring life, right? Like when you're doing your 401k and you're chasing a day job, which I love my day job. If any of my bosses are listening, I really do enjoy it right now. But I mean, the end goal for me is not my day job. My end goal is to be with my family and enjoy living where I live, and you're not promised tomorrow, right? I mean, we all know that, being, knowing what we know about life. And so I think for me, what I really loved about infinite banking was that 401k, you're basically making a bet on your future. You're my future is bright, and I'm going to keep killing myself today so that I can have a great retirement. And I've talked to people who do that. And like you said, Nate, sometimes that's people's goals and that's great. But a lot of the times when you talk to them, they're like, gosh, when I get to retirement. And what I really have loved about infinite banking is I can chase my goals now, but it still has freed me up in so many ways to live presently today with my family, and to do the things that, we're using infinite banking to buy a minivan because we're having another kid. And without infinite banking, it'd be that would strap us probably. But now it's I'm in control of that. And I'm not using that to go deploy to buy a asset that'll get me 500% return, but we need the car today, and that's what is going to help our lives be. We're living today, and that really struck a chord with me about infinite banking. Yeah, it kind of that does help you be present in your lives. So
that's true. That's another good selling point. Is even big tough expenses that come around can kind of be spun as positives. I'm well, I'm using my policy. It's all good. It'll.
I'm the bank. So, I'm going to make money on this deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah.
So Ray does a better job. Ray Poteet, the founder of our company, when he talks, he's done this longer than almost anybody in the country now. With Nelson's passing, and he describes that what used to be stressful events, when you're properly capitalized, is no longer a stressful event. And so, as you're talking about, you can choose to go buy the minivan without even really being concerned, because you actually know that you have the capital to do so. You also have a system in place to repay it and understand that it's all going to be put back in. You understand that it's probably going to be a profitable experience for you overall. Whereas you're right, if you were the 401k mentality, it would probably strap you. You know, it would be a stressful event, because the only way to make money in conventional herd-based mentalities is to part ways with it for a long period of time and never touch it again. That's the only way that they, it's the only perspective they have. And I think you bring up a good point there, Garrett, about retirement that we bring up all the time, which is essentially that retirement as an idea is a pretty horrific master. So the idea of the conventional retirement, most people find themselves stuck in jobs they don't really care for, doing things they don't exactly enjoy, but they believe that if they stick with it long enough, they can accumulate enough money in retirement programs to one day retire. And as you bring up, the idea in a lot of ways is that's actually not the life they want. They didn't know there was another way, which is why we call IBC the gateway drug to other types of financial endeavors, which it can really be. It's like you start with IBC and suddenly your mentality is, I'm not just storing up money, I'm building capital that can be deployed. And so you start thinking, okay, what's my life going to be in 30 years when I finally retire? But it's more so being, what can I do with this capital today to produce value? And if you do that enough times, it doesn't take very long at all to achieve a much different level of financial success. And we talked about this a little bit before the show, where this is people want to know what the black and white benefits of IBC are. What can you put on paper? How's the policy going to work? Is it going to benefit me numerically? And of course, all those things are very, very important. But what we keep trying to stress, and one thing that I wanted to get out of this conversation with you guys, is just the fact that there is stuff about infinite banking. The reason why it draws people in and they suddenly become believers in it is because it's a paradigm shifting process where it not only can work numerically, but it starts to make you a better financially in many ways that you start to acknowledge would not be the case if you had never started with IBC. So it's pretty unique in that way. It's why you don't find yourself just with a whole bunch of people in the IBC community who are lukewarm about it. There's a lot of people who are cold and a lot of people who are hot. And some people think, well, they're only hot because they got sold something, or the only people who are hot are the people selling it and all that stuff. But it's like, no, the people who implement the process fall in love with it because they realize it's changed their entire mentality about what they could do with money. So
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
I think in terms of like the paradigm shift, life is still full of hard situations, and you still have to figure stuff out financially. You still have to be wise. Like it doesn't free you from the laws of money. It just is a vehicle that frees you from the conventional ways of thinking about how to do finances, really. But it still means you have to sacrifice sometimes, and you can't have everything you want all the time, and you still have to make good investment decisions. But that's right. It's definitely a paradigm shift in how you think about money. And one of the things I love about it that you guys have talked about, Nate, with us is saving money in a savings account isn't free. It has a cost to it. And so I have that line of credit thing through the infinite banking thing, and it charges interest to me every month. And it's all money has cost, and doing infinite banking actually teaches you that too. That whatever you do, even
cash has a cost.
Yeah, cash has a cost, and you don't experience that as acutely as you do when you're outside of the infinite banking. It's easy to think I'm saving money, I'm fine.
Right.
You're right. So the understanding of everything, all money has a cost, then pushes you to say, if it has a cost, I need all money to be working for me.
Yep.
And that's what you're saying about with IBC.
Exactly.
That the goal is, well, if it does have a cost, you realize that, and suddenly so I want to have as much money working for me,
right,
and as little as possible costing.
I like the analogy of even loans and cash both net you zero at the end of the day. It doesn't matter if you finance something or if you pay for it in cash. After you pay off the loan or after you replenish, or once you buy the asset in cash, you have zero cash. So the way I describe it to people is you're able to have your cake and eat it too, almost. You're able to build the cash with compound interest, and you're able to obtain the asset that is hopefully appreciating. So like for me, that I think is the biggest selling point. So
it is. I mean, having your money do multiple things at the same time is fairly unique in the world, and so that some people can make it seem like it sounds too good to be true, obviously, because it's a new concept that seems awkward. That's why there's kind of fundamental layers of education, like we do in the beginner's course and Nelson does in his book, where it's not just numbers on paper. If you don't understand some things, then you'll always wonder why it works the way it works. So like you'll always wonder, why do I have to pay interest on a policy loan? If you don't understand any of the bricks that were laid way before that concept even should come into play, then that concept would be weird to you. And especially if you hear like a Dave Ramsey video and say, you're borrowing money from a life insurance policy, you're paying interest to use your own money, and suddenly you're like, well, yeah. I did a podcast recently, I think it aired, where I was talking about the critics. I think it was actually the most recent one as of this recording. So I think it was episode 165, where I talk about most critics of IBC bring up talking points. They don't actually have typical arguments that are sound to describe reasons why someone should not pursue it. Normally, it's kind of the Dave Ramsey thing, which is talking points. Whole life is bad. That doesn't mean anything. That's just a talking point. That's like, as I bring it, it's like saying, it's like saying the rich don't pay their fair share. It's like, it's a talking point.
Yeah,
it doesn't have meaning.
Like 401ks are great because of the match. Like it's true, but it's not really like.
Not really.
More to it, right?
Yeah, it's not really. Yeah. It's all, everything in finance has to be compared to what otherwise would have been done. So if you're going to make anything that's not a talking point, you have to use a lot. And of course, they can't do that on their show. They have to be black, white, succinct. In order to, that's his personality. So of course, that's what he's going to do. But all that to be said, there's a whole bunch of talking points out there that are awkward.
Sure,
but you can overcome the talking point by layering the bricks, which is essentially what you guys did. Because Garrett, you may have said you kind of jumped in, but you did exactly what we would hope you do, which is a decent amount of research before getting started. It wasn't really just like, hey, a conversation with Dave, who's the uncle, who's listening to this, and was. I told him I would mention him in the show, by the way, so I thought I'd throw him a bone. But anyway, it was he got you. He piqued the interest, but it was like, okay, I dove in to actually figure it out myself as well.
Yeah, and I think that we've talked about this a lot, Nate, that you really have to like catch the fever before you jump in. It's if you're gonna just do it because you just think you should do it, and like Nate told you should do it, you're not gonna feel good about it. I mean, you really have to. You have to believe that we've been talking about, and I think we've talked about like reading the book and understanding the concept, and if you can get through all of Nash's like exclamation points, like triple exclamation points, which is he has he's excited about what he's saying.
Right. But I think that's the cool part about the books is they are so like they're almost like the ethos and the emotion behind it too, in addition to the practicality, which kind of fires you up and allows you to kind of jump in. So I know all those other books are like that. They're pretty funny and not like super focused on the mechanics. Some of them, it's more just,
it's about your heart.
Austrian economics.
It's the heart, Garrett. I'm telling you, you're right. Yeah. Like you could make a white paper treatise on the benefits of IBC and nobody would do it because some people would, but I mean, it's not IBC is compelling because of the paradigm shift that takes place on top of the numbers.
Certainly.
And,
that's the biggest part, I think.
Nelson does a better job than anybody because he doesn't even spend, like he does not give away answers in his book, which upsets people. So like if you guys remember reading his book, he'll say if this is confusing to you, go back to when I did the grocery store example. And you're like, what? And then if this doesn't make sense, go back to this page. You're like,
I remember drawing on a whiteboard, showing my wife like peas and connecting all the dots.
So you bought into it because you understood the illustrations and actually how they depicted reality. And I think that's what he wanted to do was depict reality. Yeah. And he did it with analogy, which is I think a proper way to do it. It can turn very analytical people off to do it that way, but it's also the quickest way for people to grasp a concept is oftentimes through an analogy. So
yeah, and
Certainly.
I'm kind of like, to bring it back to what Miles said at the beginning, I think partly why we were able to jump in so quickly with IBC was because we were fired up about financial freedom and real estate. And then like he and I we had this album of like screenshots of Bigger Pockets. Miles is like, go listen to this one, go listen to this one. And I remember like I was you kind of have to want to get out of the way you're doing things, the way the herd is doing things, to use, your lingo, Nate.
Thanks, Garrett.
You have to like want, shameless plug there, right? You have to like want to get out of that in order to really do IBC. Like you can't do IBC and like, well, you could, I guess. You can't do IBC and like just, keep trudging towards just,
retirement,
I don't know.
whatever that looks like.
Like you have to be wanting it. It's not the same thing as a 401k. Like whenever I talk to people about it, they're like, oh, well, it earns 5% return and like the stock market earns about 5%. So it's the exact same thing. And I'm just like, no.
Yeah.
Like it's like equivalent of like, and anyways, it's the vehicle by which you go use it for other things. And if you want to control your destiny and you want to be in charge of that and you want to, be your own boss and take risks like that, it's a really powerful, it's like the most powerful thing out there for that sort of thing.
You have assets, liabilities, and the bank always. I think that's a epiphany that struck me pretty hard.
Yeah.
Someone's always going to be banking with my money, even if I'm super successful and buy a bunch of assets and a bunch of real estate, and it's banking. The function of banking is always going to be occurring. So might as well take advantage of it and reclaim it for,
as we talk about, banking
it
is a fact of life. It is a reality. You actually can't escape banking. And so that's why we talked about in the 4 stages of IBC commitment webinar and podcast we recently did, kind of answers what Garrett, you were saying when you said, well, you can't really do IBC unless you change your mentality. And then you're like, well, maybe you could, but it just wouldn't work very well. And that's what we're saying is you can do that on the lower levels of IBC. You could commit to a low level and just kind of be a saver or something like that and just save some money into it. But you certainly aren't going to be practicing IBC unless a paradigm shift occurs. And that's when you can actually start operating in what we would call real IBC. So,
yeah. I mean, it's super cool for Miles and me to look back. Like, it's only been 3 years, and like you said, we've done a lot in those 3 years together. And it'll be cool to maybe do this podcast in like 3 more years when our policies are actually, getting that return. But I mean, it'll just be cool to see like what happens in the next couple of years as we keep pushing down this road. And it's not an easy road, but I feel like it's kind of cool to have this discussion and kind of take a step back and look back from where we've come from because of all of this.
Yeah, definitely.
So. Yeah. Amen. Well, and I've been seeing it from afar, which is why I invited you guys, because I was thinking, if there is clients of mine, and you guys wouldn't be the only ones, of course, but who really have, their life seems to have been really impacted in the way that we hoped it would be for everybody. Miles and Garrett would be up there on the list of people who it's impacted quite, the way we would hope it would be, who, fell in love with it, pushed it forward, achieved things with it, started moving fast, and are just really bad at telling other people about it. And, we're working on that.
So, here's the plug for Dave, is that Dave got Miles and I into it, but Miles and I haven't been able to get anyone into it. So I know
we tried. It's not for lack of effort.
I know you guys are talking to people. As I said, you guys got to be more charismatic. Yeah, or something. I don't know. But anyway. Well, guys, I think we've gone pretty long. Anything else you want to mention before we shut down?
No, I think I'm good. Thank you for facilitating the last couple years.
It's been a joy on my end. It really has. It's been a privilege, a pleasure. I'm proud of you guys. Appreciate what you guys bring to the table. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep asking questions. Garrett's always concerned he's asking too many questions.
Yeah, we text you a lot.
You know, he's
I'm always like
about
calling
that.
Miles. Like, I called Nate again today.
I know it, and he's always worried. And I, you know, but that's what makes people believers is when they spend time in it. And you know, we'd much rather have someone reaching out all the time than someone never reaching out. And you know, I've heard, you know, Ray's kind of the poster for this too. Ray has so many clients who just think he's so successful, he's so busy, he never has time. You know, he probably doesn't have time for me, and they won't even reach out. And we're like, good grief, people.
Okay, so I'll reach out more. Thanks.
Yeah, I like to be busy. But all right, guys, thank you so much for being on the show. Everyone listening, if you guys are enjoying the show, man, we'd really appreciate it if you would give us a like or a review or a rating. It really is the number one thing that gets the show out there. This has been Dollars and Nonsense. If you follow the herd, you will get slaughtered.